Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Barrett Louie, part of the marketing team here at RiskIQ. We're excited you were able to join us for today's workshop. During today's session, we'll be examining real phishing emails and other threat actor methods of getting a foothold into your organization. Before we get started, there are a couple housekeeping notes. First, today's workshop is being recorded. Second, today's session will be interactive. Throughout the workshop, we'll be unmuting lines for questions and conversation. If you have a question while your line is muted, please send them through the questions window in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll answer as many questions as we can as we go. Now, let me introduce you to today's speakers. First, Benjamin Powell. Benjamin is RiskIQ's Director of Technical Marketing and will be leading today's workshop with our Director of Intelligence Architects, Doug Helton. And with that, I'll hand it over to Benjamin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I want to thank Doug for joining us. It's a real honor to have him here. This theme of this workshop is phishing. And with the vulnerabilities that came out from Microsoft, I thought it would be a really good opportunity to talk about that as well, because that could be another aspect of an attack. It's email related, so Doug's going to get through all the vulnerabilities, what you need to know, how to check your systems, how to even use passive total to see if something's vulnerable or not. So we're going to go through that. The phishing things that we're going to do is how to do it safely. We're going to investigate an open source intelligence article talking about a phish, a personal phish that I get every week. And then another one is, where's my stimulus check? Everyone, that's top of your mind. So threat actors are using that to target people and steal PII and potentially steal your stimulus check. So I'll show you how to do that as well. So that's what we're going to cover today. But before we start, I want to go through and talk about the different types of accounts that we have in Passive Total. And the reason why I mention this is sometimes when we do the examples and we look at things, if you're using a free email account compared to a corporate email account or a paid email account, you might see things differently. So one of the things that we do is we give you a promo code. And on every single slide, you'll notice that there's a promo code either on the top or the bottom. In this particular case, it's on the bottom. So VR THW-2021-EXCH. And this will allow you to have full enterprise access, see all the data going back to the beginning of time that we've collected it. So when you do these exercises, you'll be able to see the full scope of the capabilities of what you can do. Now, this code's going to work for 7 days, okay? After those 7 days, if you're a community user, you're only going to see 14 days of data, and you're not going to see a lot of the advanced data sets. So some of the things that we're going to be doing today, you can only figure out if you have those advanced data sets. And so it's really important to do that. Now, one of the things that we do is we give everybody SSL certs. That's an advanced data set. And if you use your corporate email when you register, we will give you the services to find out what ports are open and how the banners, to read the banners and see what's happening. The enterprise accounts will be able to see host pairs and components and cookies, and we'll get through those data sets. But the reason why this is important is that if I'm using the free community account with a free email service, we haven't really vetted you. We don't know that you're doing this for good. You might be a bad person that's trying to find places to attack. So we limit what you can see in the product. You still have access, but you don't have access to everything. So if you did an investigation with that, you might only see a little bit of the infrastructure when we chain it together. If you use the organizational email, you're going to see more and be able to chain more of that together. And you'll be able to see additional data sets that you don't get with the free email account. Now, if you use the corporate email account with all the advanced data sets, you'll be able to infrastructure chain the entire infrastructure together to find out the full extent of that attack or yourself. And so this is the breakdown of how many queries and what you get per day that we give you. So everyone's going to be enterprise for the next 7 days. And I'll go through and explain, how to put those accounts in, okay? So if you are new to RiskIQ and have never set up an account, you can go to community.riskiq.com/registration, and you can enter the promo code at that point. Now, if you happen to already have an account, you can go into your account settings, and under profile, there's a promo code section. And at this point, you can click on the little pencil, you can type in, it's case sensitive, that promo code in that section and click out of it, and you'll see your numbers jump. So you're gonna get a lot of API access, you're gonna get the UI access to do all the queries with all the data sets. All that will automatically activate for the next 7 days. So please enjoy, have fun, and this is interactive. So if you have a question, anytime during the workshop, type it into the chat or in the question section. We'll try to answer it during the workshop. Either Doug or myself or Barrett will be answering those questions. If it's a great question, we're gonna stop. We're gonna unmute the lines. We might even bring you online to ask the question, and then we'll answer it, and we'll go through and we'll see where it goes, because this is live, okay? So today, some of the tools that we're going to be using will be RiskIQ Passive Total, but we don't just stay there. We know that threat investigators need to be able to go through and fully investigate and use all the tools at your disposal. Some of those are free tools that other people make. And I always want to make sure that when you walk away, you have the skills and the experience necessary to do your job the best you can, okay, with anything you can do to get the job done, because at the end of the day, that's what matters, is the results. So I want to make sure that you understand what you can do, not only within our tools, but what you can do with other tools to combine those together to give you the best outcome possible. So we're going to use Passive Total, we're going to use Google Safe Browsing, we're going to use Euroscan.io to look at images and examine phishing emails safely. And we're going to use the Google Admin Toolbox header tool. And then there's another one, MSEXCH Toolbox, that I found as well, that's really good, that sometimes the Google one won't work if it's not sent to a Google email, so it won't examine it. So the MSEXCH Toolbox I've seen work more consistently. So that's probably the one I'm going to use. So with that, I'll give you some background on myself. If you haven't come to a workshop before, this might be new to you. So I'm the Director of Technical Marketing here at RiskIQ. I worked in IT for over 30 years, managing and running teams responsible for the servers, the infrastructure, security, and then I went over and started working in some startups. So I've worked in state government, International Airport in San Diego, the Port District, education, biotech, financial services, manufacturing, even software development. So I've worked all around. Now, the fun fact about me is I enjoy spear phishing. But when I tell that to people in our industry, they don't take my emails anymore. But I actually swim in the ocean, and this is something I caught about 4 or 5 months ago. This was in San Diego and La Jolla. And so that was a fish I caught. So, and down below is my email and my LinkedIn if you want to reach out to me. So please make this interactive. We want to make this really fun and exciting for you. And with that, I'll turn over to Doug to talk about himself.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. Nice to meet you, at least virtually, and thank you for coming to the webinar. I'm the Director of Intel Architects here at TrueStar, which means myself and my team really work with our sales organization in particular and our solution architects to make sure that we're aligning our product to your Intel use cases, workflows, Intel priorities and requirements. We are practitioners by trade. I've got over 20 years of experience as an Intel analyst myself, split almost equally at this point between the government and military side. I've done signals intelligence, counter-espionage special agent, including cyber counter-espionage operations. Then on the private sector side, I've worked in Fortune 10s, I've worked in critical infrastructure, and then in the startup world, I've advised and consulted with any number of companies varying in size from Fortune 1s to outside the 2000s, various maturities, cross sectors. So that's me in a nutshell. Again, interesting fact, I do search and rescue for a nonprofit. that does approximately 95% of the search and rescue, what's considered inland in the US. So I fly in an air crew as an observer and photographer, as well as work on a ground team.
I have another fun fact for you. You said you worked for TrueStar. You used to work for TrueStar. Now you work for
TrueStar. Yeah.
So welcome aboard, and Doug, thank you. I can't wait to see what you're going to talk about with Exchange. It's going to be fascinating. So this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about Microsoft, what the scope of this global exposure is, what people are doing, and how we're helping the community and what we're doing with that data and information. It's pretty fascinating. We've worked with Microsoft and scoped out all the different Exchange servers in the world, figuring out all the different versions, the patch levels, hot fixes, and we have that information in the system. And we've contacted all the ASNs, so it's pretty cool, the scope of visibility we have for the attack surface of the world. I'm going to talk about 3 different types of phish investigations. One will be if you read an article and they talk about a phish and they give a URL, how to go through and investigate that and see more. A personal phish, so somebody thinks I have Wells Fargo banking, I don't. And every week I get an email saying that my Wells Fargo account has a problem, please log in. And this has been going on for probably a year and a half, but I keep on copying and saving these. So we'll go through and investigate one of them. And then everyone is trying to check your stimulus check. And so I had talked about this in the past, but it's creeped back up that people are now targeting people that want to check their where's my check. And so there, over the last month, there's been an upswing in that, and we're going to go through and I'm going to show you how to use Passive Total to find active phish on a target. So we'll do that. Now on the very bottom, you'll see riskiq.com/threat-hunting-resources. So this is where I'll put some exercises, different videos, and links to like the URLs that we use in these exercises. And last week we did one on APIs, how to use it. And there was an example where we actually put some workbooks up there, Jupyter notebooks, and those are up there as well. So you can see how to use those APIs. And the next one I'll do, I'm going to be doing some deep dive into some more APIs. So we'll do a use case in the UI, and we'll do one, the same investigation with an API, and show you how you can really expand that investigation in 1/10 of the time. So before we begin, we like to ask some poll questions. So when we talk to the audience, we know how to frame it to your perspective. So with that, Barrett, I'd like to turn this over to you to start the poll questions.
Sounds good. Here they come.
Okay, so the first poll question, what type of Passive Total account are you using? Free email, the corporate email, the paid one, just so I understand your level in the product and what visibility you have. Okay, so about a quarter of you have the free email account, another quarter are paid, and the rest are the corporate email accounts. Okay, great. Okay, what area of the organization do you work for? Now, this is important because if there's something with a vulnerability, if there's something like if you're a pen tester, threat intel, we can make the focus that direction for you. Okay, 23% incident responder, 3% vuln management, 19% SOC, 49% threat analysts, and 7% pen testers. Okay, very cool. Do you host your own Microsoft Exchange servers at your organization? Since we're doing things with Exchange, this vulnerability was basically if you hosted your servers. So we want to know if you were kind of affected or not by this. Okay, 49% no, 41% yes. Okay, so pretty significant still. Did you patch for the 0-day vulnerability if you were using exchanges in-house? 73% yes, great, awesome. 27% no, because you probably are using hosted services, hopefully. Otherwise, you need to patch. Do you know if any of your partners use hosted Exchange servers and whether or not they are patched? So I want to know if you deal with partners all the time. If they have vulnerabilities and they can get popped, they could potentially steal your information, hurt you, give you different routing numbers to pay your bills, do some bad stuff. So I want to make sure that you check your partners out that you're doing business with to make sure that they've fixed their stuff so you don't have an exposure. Okay, so 48% yes, 52% no. So as security professionals, you should talk to finance and purchasing and find out who they're dealing with and really go back and check. You'll be able to, when you're done today, you'll be able to check to see if those people are susceptible. And if they are, you might want to say, hey, before you send that PO or the routing number to the bank or whatever you're going to do, don't until they've patched. Okay.
Here comes the last poll question for today.
Last poll question. Okay. Do you know anybody that was compromised by the Exchange vulnerability? %, yes. Wow. Okay. Wow. That's a lot. Okay. Even one is too much. So that's good to know. Okay. So I'm going to quickly give some background because there's some people here that are new to these workshops, and then we're going to jump right in. So I'm going to go fast through these. So what RiskIQ does is we have sensor networks and collection networks where we actually go out and talk to all the different IPv4 space on the internet, all the name servers, and we identify what's there and build a map of the internet, an entire map of the internet. And then for organizations that do business with us, we can give you your view of what you have on the internet so you can see everything or see yourself. And what Passive Total does is gives you access to all that data to query to find out what's happening. And so it's made up of certificates, JavaScript, passive DNS, the A records, all the other DNS records, WHOIS records, certificates. We actually bring in the full document object model, so then we can pull out cookies and trackers and different things. We even have one of the largest mobile app databases in the world with over 300 mobile app stores that we have information about. That comes in, and we do about 250,000 new domain resolutions a day we see come online. We have over 106 billion unique DNS records. We do about 2 billion web requests a day bringing that data in. So it's pretty big. So with that, when you see that one first piece of something bad, you can link it together using RiskIQ to build that infrastructure chain to see the full extent of that. Now, one of the things that we found out was when an open source intelligence article comes out, the first thing that we saw that people were doing, talking to the community, was they would come to RiskIQ and they would start looking at those indicators and trying to figure out, did these investigators get everything? Was there extra that I should be aware of? And so we saw and we talked to people saying, what are the typical queries you do? Well, they would read an article and then take those indicators that might be in a photograph or in some way that's kind of hard to get out of that article and go through and start looking at passive total. So with that, what RiskIQ did was we created a threat intel portal where we would take those articles and we would even have we would take all those indicators out of the photographs and everything and make it easy that you can click on them and open them in Passive Total and see them and use them. But then we had threat intel people and researchers actually take some of those articles and do the work to find all the additional indicators and make those available to the paid customers. And these are the enterprise indicators. So if you click on that, you'll see everything. Like, you don't have to go through and piece it all together. Somebody's already done that. And they're all downloadable. So you can download those things and bring them into your SOAR or your SIM or your firewall and take action with them right away. So that gives you the capability, excuse me, to start off with that initial set of indicators in that article, and with RiskIQ actually have even more. So you can be further along in that investigation. And so that's why that threat intel portal is so useful and successful. So as that data comes in, we have data scientists, machine learning researchers, and threat investigators that will figure out things, how to identify something, how to look at something. The data scientists will make it at scale to be able to find those things. So as the data flows in, it goes into those data sets and we understand what's happening. But we also have the ability to go back in time. So if you ever dealt with like a SIM before, where you see an event and you go, I'm going to create a rule that when I see this again, let me know. You can't go back in time and set that. You have to set it from this point forward. But with RiskIQ, we actually have like a time machine, and we can go back in time and see what happened. So what that means is that if we see a cookie value and we go, we did an investigation, we got done, we found this one cookie that linked everything together. We can actually go back in time and find everywhere that was. And the way that we do that is we found, for example, that there was a cookie that was base 64 encoded. And so we're able then to decode that and understand it. We created a rule. So what we do is every day we have the aggregate of the data that we had from yesterday. We have everything that we collected from today, and we have a merge. And we do this a couple times a day. So when that happens, we can actually have that rule in place that merges it, and all that data now goes through again, and we check it again. And so then that becomes the new aggregate that everybody uses. And then that's what the platforms use to give you that data. So that's how we can go back and link things together that we didn't know about every single day. So this is something unique to RiskIQ. So when we overlay this on here, as the researchers and the threat intel people figure out something new, we're able to put that in place and then run all our data through there again and find these new relationships and new chains together to give you that new perspective that you didn't have before. Okay. So all this is doing is making it that the cyber kill chain, you're being able to find things earlier and earlier in the cyber kill chain. So if somebody is talking about something, if they're setting up their infrastructure, they're building it, we see all that stuff about 1 to 4 days before it's active. So if you look at the typical time of what could happen, there might be discussions about what's happening, saying, hey, I want to attack this company. Do you have any machines that are already vulnerable or that you have remote access into in these organizations? So we can see that in the deep and dark web. When someone buys the domain, we see it. When they park it, we see it. When they start putting the images online, we're seeing that. So we can actually see something and stop it before it gets weaponized and ready to hurt you. Okay, so 1 to 4 days. So then once all that stuff's set up, now that's where you would come in and say, I saw something internally. But at that point, if you're seeing it internally, it's going to cost you a lot of money and you might have a lot of problems. If you can stop it earlier in the chain, it costs less and you have less exposure. So that's what we're trying to do. Now we're constantly monitoring and figuring out things. So if we take care of something one time and we do the takedowns and it pops back up someplace else, and we can actually see it and we can immediately take action again and take it out. So those are the things that we do all the time. So the way that we're able to do this is that we all use the same playing field. We all have to play by the same rules. The good and the bad people are on the same playing field. So with that, the bad guys can't avoid giving out signals. And those signals are collected, and then we process them, and we know what's happening. So the things that we're doing, you can do internally as well to be able to link things together and understand what's happening. A combination of the inside data that you have and the outside data that we have, when you marry that together and you can find those relationships, you can really expand and understand the full extent of the attack that's happening to you. So if you have a threat actor targeting somebody, and let's say the threat actor is in Brazil and the targeted user is in Canada, just from the threat actor being online, there's an IP, a net block, autonomous system number, internet service provider. We already know that. When they create their email, we know the email company, we know the date timestamp, we know languages. There's a lot of stuff that you understand. And when they send it, we get all those transit IP blocks, autonomous systems that they go through, and then it gets to the end user. And then the end user, they know when it was read. They can have an HTML that it will link back to the threat actor so they can run some fingerprinting stuff. They can understand the host, the geolocation, all that information. So these are all the types of signals that are out there. But unless you're collecting them and unless you understand what's happening, you don't know what's occurring. So you have to be aware of this. You have to have things in place to be able to understand and log these things and have NTP set up so then they're all set up to the same time source so you can understand what's happening internally. So with that data, we're able then to take that outside IP address and expand it out to figure out who that is, where they are, what's happening, and linking all that stuff together. So from the A records, the IP address to domain name, that's the passive DNS. The who is information, who owns that domain. But thank you, GDPR, because you broke a lot of it. So we gave everybody certificates. So things that you used to be able to do with who is, you can do in certificates generally, and you can find things and you can link things together. The trackers, the little bits of code that run, when the person duplicates your domain, they generally will duplicate your cookies and trackers. So you'll find your Google Analytic code, for example, running in a different place. But as security professionals, only the marketing department usually sees those things, so you don't have access to it. And because of separation of duties, you might not be able to see it. But with Passive Total, you can, and you can look for your own stuff living on other sites that it shouldn't, and that's how you can find some bad stuff. And we're going to do that in that phishing example with the IRS today. Host pairs, this is what's coming in and out of every domain. So when we pull down that full document object model, we know, oh, you're bringing an image from Facebook, you're sending Google Analytics out to them. So we know what's happening, and we have that map of the flow of data on the website as we observed it from crawling it and acting like a real user. The cookies, the hashes, the open source intelligence, the full document object model that we have in our backend, the headers, the console log messages, the open ports, and exposed services. But there's a caveat. If you don't see it, you don't have the data. So if a bad guy puts up a site, does an attack and takes it down, and by the time we get to that IP address or domain, it's not there, we don't have any data. So you need to have multiple points of proof to be able to link things together to say, hey, it's on this domain that's generally having, that's been bad before. It's on an IP block that has other bad stuff. The name server that's being used has always been associated with something bad. So we actually have to look at multiple things to be able to make a good determination. So you can do this in your own organization. So everything that we do is based upon the tactics, techniques, and procedures that when we expose a threat actor and we say they did this, this was their infrastructure, they change. And when they change, we have to change the way that we collect and we find them. So it's this cat and mouse game. So you need to be able to start collecting your logs so then you can analyze them multiple different ways and have a retention that's not so short that if you do need to go back in time, you have enough data to look at. So if you have 2 weeks of logs, you might need to have 3 months of logs to be able to really figure out that threat actor came in and did very sly things. And a lot of times, the threat actors are smart enough to know what your retention periods are. So you might want to change those around every once in a while. Make them a little bit bigger every so often, just to see if you catch something that you weren't aware of. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug, and Doug is going to go through and talk about Microsoft Exchange. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Doug, I'll make you presenter real quick. Give me a second, make presenter. There you go, Doug.
All right, do you have it? Yes. Okay, so in particular, we're gonna start off talking about Microsoft Exchange. We're gonna talk a little bit about just vulnerabilities in general, and where RiskIQ and Passive Total can help with that. But where we're at today, right, is we're about 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks since public disclosure of 4 critical Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities. We're a couple months beyond what was another significant round of vulnerabilities and associated nation-state activity behind it with SolarWinds late in 2020. And so far, there doesn't seem to be any sign of slowing down. Vulnerabilities, software supply chain are going to continue to be a problem for us moving forward, whether it's on-prem hosted solutions or cloud, or even applications and components of things that are running on a website down to the component level. So components is going to be a keyword of what we talk about today. So at a high level, I won't go into the details of all 4 vulnerabilities. Hopefully you all are fairly well informed of what those are to date. They do all impact Microsoft Exchange, and even more specifically, web-facing Outlook web access, which by very definition kind of implies some web facing, but there's some mitigation actions that you can take to harden that if it is exposed. Now that Benjamin's talked a little bit about our collections, what I'd like to do is talk about what RiskIQ is able to observe at both a macro as well as a micro perspective of these vulnerabilities, how many exposures are out there, where are we at today compared to a couple weeks ago with those vulnerabilities and exposures as from a global perspective, from a national perspective. So that's all things that we're doing with our data. That's not something historically we've ever really exposed within the product itself, but the data is there, and I'll show you how to get to it as part of this conversation as well. In that dialogue, I do want to talk about what people are doing about it, because we have, based on some of our observations, we have some suspicions. I'd like to see if those are confirmed in the coming days. And then what are some things you can do about it? How can tools like RiskIQ, not limited just to RiskIQ, but how could RiskIQ or Passive Total help you or your team either today or if this should happen again? I say if, it's really more of a when, right? So this is a dashboard we've put together based on our data. Again, the crawling that's happening down to the page level of these systems of total exchange exposure. And this is today, where we're really looking at just shy of 500,000 exposed exchange systems that aren't hosted in Azure. This is not Office 365. These are impacted, at least by version numbers, of these exchange systems. You're looking at something like 297, almost 300 separate versions that have been identified. Some of those are fairly old and no longer supported products from a Microsoft perspective. Some of them are the most current versions of Exchange. If we dive into that deeper and specifically look at the versions that are impacted, and by the way, if you have questions about what major versions as well as what specific micro versions, minor versions of Microsoft Exchange are impacted, the first and the source of truth for this is going to be Microsoft itself. So take some time, visit their website. They've been very, very good about keeping their security blogs up to date on activities that you can do to identify if you're vulnerable, including scripts that you can run on your systems. It also includes some hardening recommendations. It points you to some threat hunting tools. Many in the community have commonly agreed that if they are vulnerable, it is best to assume that they have been compromised by someone at this point. Again, as this first started to unfold, we were originally looking at a group called Hafnium. They're the ones who tend to get the most attention. But even before the embargo on the vulnerabilities was released and the disclosures, vulnerability disclosures publicly disclosed, there were additional APT groups in particular who were taking advantage of these vulnerabilities. And since then, it's spiraled out of control with a wide range of actors being very opportunistic about these vulnerabilities and taking advantage of them, to include, and I don't think anyone expected it to take very long, to include ransomware variants at this point too. So this is very, very important. If you do have these vulnerabilities, highly recommend you address them sooner rather than later. But again, we went from just a little shy of 500,000 total Exchange observations that we see right now to the total observations that RiskIQ is seeing today of somewhere in the vicinity of 58,000 Exchange deployments that are still vulnerable. And again, on the previous slide, we had seen almost 300 total versions out there. We're only seeing 28 vulnerable versions today.
Hey,
From a trend
yeah,
go ahead.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
So when Doug and I were first looking at these, I was like looking, going, "Oh my goodness!" I go, "Who wasn't affected?" I go, "Oh look, North Korea wasn't affected at all by this." So that's that little white spot on the right side of the map. It's kind of funny. So what we've seen is you've seen China, Russia, threat actors from Iran and from North Korea all taking advantage of this. So it is serious. Once this went out and people understood how easy it was for them to take action, once they find a particular version of Exchange, that's all it takes. So you need to patch immediately.
And the other thing I'll say is they're not difficult to identify, right? Microsoft is providing a Nmap scan that you can use to validate this. We've got our own crawlers and passive DNS that are identifying it. It's just as easy for the attackers, so you're not hiding. There's no security by obscurity in this instance. I do want to emphasize that point.
And every single Microsoft Exchange server has to be on the internet to send mail. So it's not like it's internal and you're protected. You have to be able to communicate to the outside world to send and receive mail. So just because you're hosted, it doesn't mean it's safe.
A bit of a good news story though, right? So as we look from, again, this is RiskIQ data, total observations of those vulnerable instances, we are seeing a remarkable downward trend, both at a global level as well as within the US. So people are taking action on it. That's the good news. What is interesting, and it's not reflected necessarily in the slide, is while we see a decline in the number of vulnerable servers, we're also seeing a decline in overall Exchange observations, right? So one of the takeaways that we have is potentially, rather than rolling out a hot fix and hardening the system in place, like patching, people are actually either removing that system behind a VPN to put an additional barrier in place, or they're taking them offline altogether, which would be interesting, particularly if this is an impetus for change for more organizations to move from their own hosted instances of mail servers to more cloud services like a Google or Office 365 for business operations.
Hey, Doug, dovetailing off that a little bit, we had a question about, of the remaining Exchange servers that are still showing as vulnerable, what are our thoughts around, could those possibly be honeypots?
Certainly at this point, I would assume there is. I don't know what that percentage would be. I've only brought in these 3 slides. We actually have like a couple more dashboards built out where we're taking a look at overall observations by ASN, by vertical, by geographic location. So we are slicing the data. We're looking for some interesting trends and insights there. I don't know that we've factored in the possibility of some of them being honeypots. With the amount of research and focus on this, I would expect that a number are, but that number is not going to be 45,000, 20,000. I would suspect it to be much lower.
The other thing you have to think about too is that we're working directly with Microsoft, and they're telling us, hey, if you talk to the server and you run these commands, you can find out what hotfixes are there, what information is there. So our detection is very, very good for this. So unless the honeypots have those types of capabilities of really spoofing those types of things, we'll probably not detect it as the proper version of what they say they are. So we should be pretty accurate with what we're finding.
What I'll say about this, just the general understanding if you're impacted challenge, and it is a challenge, probably less so with Exchange than some other vulnerabilities, because most organizations at least know where their Exchange servers are. But from an Intel practitioner standpoint, when I first entered private sector Intel, getting intelligence and insight into the threat actors themselves was relatively challenging. Now that problem is completely reversed. Like, there's plenty of information, both free and open source, as well as commercial grade threat intelligence available. And in fact, probably to the point where noise is the challenge. But one problem that has persisted is understanding what it is that you're protecting. Like, what assets do we own? Particularly when we look at from a software supply chain perspective, there's a lot of third-party dependencies and components that are potentially at play. We'll show you some ways that you can start to get at that. Again, Exchange Outlook Web Access is a pretty core tool for most businesses. The majority of the people who talk to have pretty good visibility of what they have. The instances where they don't, and there are those instances, or where you're looking at companies with multiple lines of business or brands that operate semi-autonomously, companies that have grown by acquisition, and in some cases divestitures. So, for example, we talked to a company this week who shut down a line of business, but they still have legacy Exchange systems still hosted that they thought had been deprecated. So I know those challenges still persist. The further away from core technologies like an Exchange server that you get, I would say the more complicated that visibility challenge gets. And that's one of the areas that RiskIQ can help. So we'll talk through a couple resources, and in fact, I'll probably jump over into the browser to talk about a few of these things. RiskIQ from a passive total perspective, as you guys are logging in, either as an organizational or at the enterprise level, you'll see threat intel articles. We've got a number of those published as we continue to follow this. One thing I would anticipate as we get more understanding of some of the network indicators involved. Again, we're an internet intelligence company. As we get more understanding of those, particularly from incident response firms or DHS, CISA, as those become available, I think we'll be able to accelerate in our own research and understanding of some of these threat actors, campaigns, and pulling it apart. One of the challenges you'll see, like even looking at the first article, right, you've got China Chopper, is initially out of the gate, there was a large, continues to be a large number of either common open source tools used by pen testers, GitHub projects, etc., as well as very common web shells that are being leveraged for actors, which makes it very difficult to respond with anything other than generic kind of web shell detections, or from a forensic standpoint, going onto boxes themselves and doing a deep dive to look for any and everything at that point, or using, again, generic detections around just web shells in general. I expect that will change, again, as more information comes available from those who have been unfortunately impacted. I think it'll give us a better understanding of who is responsible for it, what other infrastructure is at play, is it part of a bigger campaign, and should there be things that you're looking for elsewhere in your enterprise if an Exchange server was their gateway in.
Hey, so Doug, I just want to mention, I took all of these links from these slides and I put them in the chat so you can click on these. The other question I want to ask is, How much bigger is this compared to like SolarWinds in scope of size?
Massively, right? I mean, SolarWinds has a fairly large customer base, both in the private sector as well as in the public sector globally. They were deliberately targeted, we think. I say that from a community perspective, because of their access to some of those customers based on interest of the actors behind it and types of intelligence and access they wanted to gain. Whereas with Hafnium in particular, if we're going to use them as the starting point for this conversation, it's a little bit unclear what their initial motivation or target may have been. But beyond that, beyond the first couple nation state type groups that have exploited it, it's really a free-for-all. And because mail is such a central thing to any business, regardless of size, regardless of location, like you have to have email to operate. It's been very easy for actors to exploit. While it started in a very targeted fashion, at this point, it's a opportunistic free-for-all. I'll keep saying that. And unfortunately, it's impacting companies that are better prepared for it, as well as those less so. So particularly mid-sized companies who may not have made the move, legacy companies who may have had, like, I've worked for companies before who had 30 to 45 plus Exchange servers deployed before cloud migrations. So it's impacting everybody. And unfortunately, people are going to take advantage of that.
Okay, thanks.
All right, why don't I jump over? Actually, before I do, I'm going to talk about this, but then we'll actually like demonstrate it. Benjamin today is going to take you through a number of different data sets as we look at different threat hunting techniques and investigations that you can leverage passive total for. One of the areas we're going to focus on today, the data sets, is something RiskIQ calls components. And that'll make more sense in a moment. But I have included in the slides, which you guys will get a copy of, some kind of cheats. You can use this for the OWA Exchange challenge that we're all looking at right now, point in time. But regardless of what the vulnerability is, if it's a common web component, there's a fair chance that we have detection built around that, and you can do a query on it. Either from a wholesale fashion, like we're going to take a look at a specific version of OWA in a moment. But you could also do it for your organization, and we can talk through both of those. As I mentioned, this would be stop number one for anyone. I'll foot stomp this a couple times. Pay attention to what Microsoft has. There's going to be links in their blog that they continually update for everything from patching to mitigation to threat hunting, etc. YAR rules, different signatures you can use, PowerShell scripts, it's all there. So if you are impacted or think you might be impacted, this should be stop number one if you're not leveraging it already. But as I mentioned, components. Actually, let me back out of this and pick something else so you get a broader view. So you already had it up. Let's do this. So from a data set perspective, for those unfamiliar with passive total, you're going to see a number of tabs where we parse that data into relevant fields, and you'll be able to pivot through them as well as across them. Some fields, like Benjamin today is probably going to talk to you about the host pairs, cookies, trackers. Those are very common ones to use in phishing use cases. When we look at malware or vulnerability type use cases, components are one of the areas that I go to first. So we'll go to the components tab. Again, a large organization, this is USPS.com, right? Very large entity, very well established entity. Like a lot of large enterprises, you're gonna have a lot of things different running, or a lot of different components running, and then within that, you're gonna have all kinds of dependencies too. So if you we're not gonna go through all 22,000 of these for USPS.com, but it'll give you an idea of what's there. So you've got things like tracking pixels that are embedded on web pages. You've got the CDN content. You can see specific servers, sometimes the operating system. So I can see like Apache's running. I may be able to see just hypothetically that Ubuntu is running. If they use Bootstrap to build the web page, you can see that. So you see the JavaScript. It's all going to be there. So we'll break down the.
Doug, real quick.
Yeah.
So all of the data that RiskIQ captures is freely available on the internet. So it's nothing that's installed that has to go collect this stuff. This is all open source stuff that you can go out to these websites and you can see it. So nothing is like hidden or proprietary. This is all public data that everyone is sharing because their machines are online. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this is all freely available, and this is why we have so much information on all these entities, is that we're crawling the entire internet and we see all this stuff. So that's how we're gathering that.
Yep. This stuff is by design, something that's on your public facing infrastructure. A threat actor can go and look at the DOM, the document object module, for a web page. They can see this themselves. They can see what JavaScript you're running. They can see what versions are running. It's a little bit more manual for them. We've automated that process. We do it at scale across the IPv4 space. So it's all here, and it's pivotable and it's searchable, which is really why it's useful for us as defenders and investigators. So this is the components tab. I'm going to bounce back over. This is a specific query. And in the slides, as you look at the material, there are a number of different searches that you can do in Passive Total. The default one is just discover. What I would recommend you guys do, particularly if you're looking for something specific, whether that's a tracker or a cookie, or in our case, a web component, is make sure you click web component. I've got Outlook web app selected, and it's going to return a number of results. In this case, I've already tweaked it. If you look at the URL up here, right, you'll see as we dive through, we go into components, remote access, OWA, and then I've thrown in one of the specific vulnerable versions of OWA tied to the Exchange Vulnerabilities here. This is probably the easiest way to do it. So if you're looking for specific things, if you're looking at a CVE that's just been released, if you're working with your Vuln team, or you are the Vuln team and you're looking at technology that you have and you want to see if you can see it or who else has it, this is a quick and easy way to do it. And you can do that query. In this case, we've returned 24,000 items. You can download this. There's some different filters that you can run on this. If you wanted to dive into it further, you could go down to the IP address that's hosting it. We could see the domains that are being hosted on that IP address. And then again, as I mentioned, we could dive into the components too, where you're going to see it as well, right? So they're using IIS to deliver the website. We see Exchange, we see Outlook, we've got Fortinet, you see the mail server. This is what a normal, healthy web page looks like. In this case, it's one that's vulnerable.
Yeah, so one other thing is, we know when something was fixed, when it was vulnerable, when it was fixed, because we see the first and last time as well. So
Correct.
That's how we can track to say, how is this cleaned up over the internet? Because we see the previous version, and then all of a sudden we see the new version. So that's how we're able to tell, oh, this one was patched, or this one is still vulnerable, is because we're tracking all those every time we talk to it, and we see, oh, it's still this version. It's still this, oh, there's a new version. So that's why, if you notice, there's Exchange up above, but then there's Exchange down below that has the patch number, okay? So we can say, okay, at this point, we were able to detect a particular version, and now we're tracking those, and then we can see if that changes to another one. Additionally, we will be able to see that.
The other thing I'll add in, and this is just kind of a technical behind the curtain look, is different technologies present their data in different ways within a web page. So depending on things like headers and banners and responses from different things on that server or on that web page, we can get more granular with, for example, like you're going to see like out to 3 numbers for the minor version here for Microsoft Exchange. Some are going to be a little bit more like, we may only be able to get the major version, or we'll just see that the application is running. So there may be some disparity there, but at least it gives you a starting spot to begin your investigation. From there, you can filter in and dive a little bit further. And that may be pivots within RiskIQ Passive Total. It could be something else entirely as well.
And this is how you can look at your partners to say, hey, I want to look at their mail server. It's easy to find out their IP to their mail server. then you can go look at it and you can see what components they have.
I mean, we're obviously talking about Passive Total today, which is one of the core products of RiskIQ. For those who are digital footprint customers or in conversations with us or have talked to us in the past about digital footprint, you get this same look, but rather than having to come through Passive Total and hone down on your organization, essentially what you're getting on that side is a curated experience, right? So we're already going to know what's in your global inventory and your assets, what's you, what's not you. So when something like a SolarWinds or Microsoft Exchange happens, we'll quickly write the detection for it and surface that up in a dashboard for you. And for those who aren't digital footprint, one thing I would say is continue to watch the news from RiskIQ. We're offering kind of a gateway to accelerate that for you, as well as your peers and vendors in the near future.
Hey, Barrett had a couple questions that came
go
up.
ahead, Barrett.
Yeah, a couple more. Really good. How do you identify typo squatting domains in our platform?
So a number of different ways to tackle that. Benjamin, do you want to cover that in like the phishing?
I'll cover it in the phishing. I'll cover that typo squatting stuff in the phishing.
Okay, got it. Thanks. And then another one, is it possible to make a specific query for Exchange to find all Microsoft Exchange servers for a specific company?
It's a little bit harder through Passive Total only, and that's where our digital footprint product comes into play. Like that's one of the reasons it exists, is for like the vulnerability use case, as well as inventory management, et cetera. It's focused specifically on that. What I would say, and this is a vague answer again, and Benjamin, you can add to it if you want, is be patient with us. Again, watch the news. We'll have a solution that answers that for you in the very near future.
I would say very shortly, you would be able to accomplish that very easily.
Mm-hmm.
So there'll be some announcements in the coming weeks and months, and you're going to go, what? Oh my goodness, this is great. Thank you.
Because I mean, really, that's I'll speak on that point in particular, right? So you have a CVE, and you want to understand what it looks like for your organization, your company, right? As I stated earlier on, getting intel, getting data, understanding what's out there from a threat perspective is getting easier and easier. Understanding if it's relevant is the hard part, and then prioritizing, right? So is it relevant? If it is, where does it rank stack in priorities? Is there something more dangerous, higher risk, more severity behind it elsewhere? And that's really where you start to shift gears and operationalizing that intel and bringing it to the owning teams, whether that's IT or vulnerability management, security operations or risk. That's the context that intel analysts are going through every day. And that's something that you'll see us solve even easier here soon. The one thing I was going to show, we were again talking about those URL queries. Like in this version, I'd already moved off of it. But anytime you see one of these versions, just append it. If we can detect it, you'll know right away. If we can't detect it down to that level, you also know. Benjamin, I don't think you can do wildcards with these, though. That's kind of one downside,
no, but
right?
You could potentially even do this and this. So you can go to the URL and potentially even show, I want to see this component and this component in your search. And so I'll show that in the next workshop, how to edit it to show two components.
Okay.
So you have this followed by this, then it will show up. The one thing you can do to easily do this is when you find a version listed, if you click on it, it will populate the search criteria for you. When I do one, I'm going to show you how to look for like a particular type of tracker. Instead of finding all the trackers, I'm going to make it very specific. So I'm going to show you how to do that when I do my examples, when we do the IRS. So these are some like editing the URL to do the search to find something specific is a way that you don't bring back as much data, but it's more precise. And so this is the type of thing we're trying to show you. Instead of seeing every outlook, you can look for just those vulnerable ones. Or if it's your own IP range, if you look at those, you can filter to see if it has that component. So then you can just take the URL, change the IP, have the number there, and search and find that as well. So there's some things that you can potentially do for that question that came up earlier, to quickly go through and look at them. And you can just click on them and see them if you created them outside of the UI.
So the other thing I want to highlight with components in particular is while we're focused right now on a vulnerability, right? In this case, we're reactive. A vulnerability has been disclosed and we need to understand if we're potentially impacted or not. You can also use components proactively. So we do have component detection on, actually, let's just do one. So if I go to component, actually, let me delete this. I'm going to go to component and look for Cobalt Strike, right? So a number of the pen testing tools and some of the more prominent kits, C2 panels, etc., will have component searches for too. So if I just search for Cobalt Strike, right, like one of the things I get right away is about 7,000 IP addresses that RiskIQ has observed or is currently observing hosting the Cobalt Strike panel, C2 panel. So you can use it both ways. Like you could then use this proactively to go and stream this into defensive controls, go threat hunting on it, a number of things. So
awesome.
Let me jump back in and we'll take a look at what else we have left. And again, the kind of the tips and the queries for how to look for this stuff using components is there. We've given you some examples with a couple different versions. Look at Microsoft Notes, Microsoft Security Research blog in particular. And if you do have Exchange running and you think you know what versions you have, search for those versions. Third-party validation is never a bad thing. And then in addition to that, some of the things that we've referenced in the conversation today around Microsoft Exchange, some key resources that'll help you and your organization work through this if you are impacted, are also going to be in here. And I expect more and more of this to come out, particularly around the threat actors and the malware that people are seeing in the coming days and weeks.
Awesome.
All right, I'm going to hand it back to you, Benjamin.
Okay, so let me.
But I will.
There we go. Make presenter.
But I will continue to remain on the line if anyone has any questions for me throughout.
Awesome. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? Can you see it, Doug?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay, so I just have to remind everybody that what we're going to be doing is looking at bad things. So don't go to these places directly. So what we're going to do, and this is what we try to teach you, is that you need to use tools that are buffer. It's that air gap between you and the bad thing. So you go to this tool, the tool goes out and grabs the stuff, brings it back, and then you're viewing that tool. So it's like a remote access, like a jump box that you're using to go to these bad things. Two reasons. First reason is that the bad guy won't know that you're doing it, okay? Because you're using this tool to do it and they don't know who's driving that tool, okay? The other thing is you don't want to get infected. You don't want to ruin your house, ruin all your stuff, or potentially ruin your organization, or infect friends or family or other companies. So don't go there directly, okay? So we're going to go and use RiskIQ, Passive Total, and other tools to do those types of analysis so you can have peace of mind that you're safe and secure. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do an investigation on an article that was recently published. So give me a second. I'm just going to grab some URLs and I am going to copy them and put them all into the chat. Okay. And then I'm going to bring up my slides and we will walk through this and talk about it. Okay. So what happened was there was this article and it was targeting older people that were still using AOL Mail. And yes, it still exists. So they were basically saying, we don't want to say goodbye. You know, your account will be deactivated unless you log in and you check your mail or do something. So they're trying to steal their their PII and get access to their email server. And so this article didn't block out the URL that was listed in there. So I thought, okay, that would be really cool to go through and do an investigation to figure out what's there. So in this scenario, you're a threat hunter and you want to determine if this attack is still happening and to see what other phishing attacks are being directed at AOL users, okay? So I'm going to show you some techniques that we can go through and say, hey, is this still current? It's not. And then if it's not, well, I want to find more people that are attacking these types of users. How can I do it? How can I investigate that? So that's what we're going to do right now, okay? So I gave you all the links I'm going to use. We're not going to go through all of them, but you have them all. So, and when we give you the slides, it's part of the slides. You'll have all this access to all of it. So if you have a friend that you want to share this with, we'll have a recording up on YouTube and we'll have this deck going along with it. Okay, so let me bring up my different, all the real stuff that we can really get in and get our hands dirty. So this article came out on February 28th, and I go, hey, this is really good. I was going to do a phishing focused workshop. So as I went through and I was reading this, I saw right here that was the email that was bad. That was the URL that was bad, and this was a copy of it. So I said, okay, I want to investigate this. So what I did was I went out to RiskIQ, Passive Total, and I queried this, okay? So I see that there was 2 different emails that were showing up, and you can see the first and last scene when they were. And what this is showing right here is our heat map, which is 6 months worth of time. And every single number that appears in this graph is something new that appears on that date. And if you notice the little triangle in the corner, that means something new happened on that date, like a new IP address was added. So if I look at all 6 months and I see these little triangles, I can see when something changed. So I can visually see right away. Now on the right-hand side, this is the legend. If something is green, it means that it was non-routable and routable on the same day. If it's blue, it means that the IP address was routable. If it is a dark gray, it means it was non-routable. And right now you're thinking, dude, it's the internet. If it's not routable, it means it's not going to be on the internet. You're not going to be able to see it. True, but we can see the IPs. And you're going, how can you see the IPs? They're not routable. So what happens is during our discovery phase, when we're going on talking to the internet, we might see a domain and we get the WHOIS record. The WHOIS record goes, this name server is responsible for this domain. So we go to that name server. We don't just query that one name from the name server. We say, oh, can you give me all of your names on the name server? And the name server goes, sure, and it gives them all to us. So we get every single domain, every single IP address that name server has assigned to it. And somebody might have assigned an internal IP or a loopback address or a routable IP. And so we see them and we collect them and we understand them. So threat actors, they might stage their machine, have it already under a loopback address. They turn it on for a couple hours or a day or so, and then they turn it back off and make it back to a loopback. So we'll see that. So if we see that type of transition, you're going to see a color change, and that's out there. Okay, so that's important to understand, especially with phishing investigation, because you don't always hear about it right away. You might hear a day later, a week later, a month later, and then you're responsible for going to do that investigation without having anything that's concrete that you can touch. And I'm going to show you now. So now we look at this and we go, okay, what do I see? I see 2 IP addresses. It hasn't been up for that long. What's the WHOIS information? There's nothing in here. And if I go back over time, Weebly, it's going back to 2013 that there might be some information here. So not much, okay? No certificates. There's 50,000 different domains associated with this free thing. Okay, 2 components. Not much, no information. Host pairs. So look at the host pairs and go, okay, there was some CDN information. Okay, they pulled in some style sheets. We get the DNS information. Okay, a CNAME. Not much. 3 cookies associated with this. Okay, so what am I going to do now? So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, well, is it still active? I can't go there directly because who knows what it will do. So I'm going to use a tool. So I'm going to grab this domain. Okay. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to go to URL scan.io. And the reason why I'm going here is RiskIQ has this information. It's in the back end, but you can't see it in passive total. So I want to make sure you can use a tool that you can get that same type of information that we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick this off and I'm going to say, go right now and look at it. So when I do it from the main screen here, it's actually going to send a crawler, go look at it, pull in that data and give that data back to me. So I had that done already, and when it does that, it says 404, page not found. It's not live anymore. So you're going, oh, okay, my investigation's over. No, it's not over. You can still do stuff with it. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to do a search, and I'm going to try to find anything that's using the login for AOL, because I want to find anybody else that's phishing it. And what they're going to do is they're going to take that login screen and then they're going to duplicate it or reference it or just direct people there. So I want to see what that is. So what I'm going to do is I go out to Google. I also went out to Google and I did a search for that type of that same domain. And there's nothing. Google Safe Browsing doesn't have any information because the site is offline. They're not using it anymore. So if I did a search for AOL login, I get the logins, okay? And if I look at it, this is what it looks like, okay? So now I know that this little part right here is the actual piece to get to the site, okay? Like if I was gonna log in. So if I want to go out and find anybody that's doing that, I can use a tool like URL scan.io and search for like AOL.com, okay? Or I can search for login, okay, .aol.com. Now that I do this, I start seeing all of these things showing up and the number of hours that these things have last been seen. So what happens is somebody might say, hey, I'm investigating something, I want to look at it, and they go to URL scan.io and manually kick off a scan. It goes out there, grabs that data, and it's available and it's in its database. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of these and we're going to see which ones are potentially bad ones, okay? From doing the search capability up here, the search, to see what historically has happened, because if we go back to that original one, this is the one that's finished now, it's not online. So I want to find out during that time period, maybe the real one was active during that time period. So if we went back in time, we could potentially find it, or anybody new that's attacking them. Okay, so if we take a look at these, if I do a Command F and I look for AOL dash, okay, I can look for those and see, did any of those show up? So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to do login, I'm going to do AOL.com, okay? So I have all these other ones. So someone asked about typo squatted domains. That's like a domain that looks real, but isn't real. So like here, I'm looking at all these ones that have them in here, and I can start going through to see, hey, do I see anything that looks kind of not correct in this list? So I'm going to go through and I'm going to load more. And let me see. I have one of them in here that worked. So from the original login one, here's this login.aol.com that happened a minute ago. I'm going to show you now how to find the people that are attacking AOL. So this is the real legitimate site, login.aol.com. If you look at the HTML, these are all the components. Like if you bring in that full document object model, you can see all these things. One of them is you can see that there's some PNGs associated with these. So if I came here and I said, hey, I want to search for this image anywhere on the internet that you found it, okay, any other site, because they've hashed it, they know that this file is exactly like another one that might have the same hash. They go, hey, it's the same file. So if I search on this, I will now see everywhere that image on every site that URL scan.io went to. So now that I have this, I can do a Command F. I can look for AOL.dash, for example, for like typo squatted. And now I'm starting to see all of these ones that are listed in here. Okay, AOL Center.secure tech.team. So these are like typo squatted potentially. So if I open this up in another tab, I can look and see, oh, look, it's malicious. I found a malicious one now. So now I can take these IPs, I can take these domains, and I can go back to Passive Total, and I can start investigating these things. So this is a technique that you can use if you want to keep your skills up to now go, okay, I have this domain here. Let's go back to Passive Total. So if I open up Passive Total, and let me make sure I'm going to turn this to advanced just to jump right in. Okay, so now I'm looking and I'm going, oh, it was only up for 2 weeks. It had one IP, it jumped to another IP, but this is our Analyst Insights. So these are the types of questions analysts will be thinking about that we try to answer for you automatically and give you that extra information. So this could be like the points of proof saying, hey, it just got a new subdomain. The WHOIS record just changed. IP address is now going to a place that is normally seen with bad traffic. It's been blacklisted. So this has been blacklisted 19 days ago, and it's a resolving blacklist. So it changed and it got blacklisted again. So this is how you can go through and start looking at these things and try to find additional domains that are attacking a target. So as we go through and we go back to this list, there were other ones that were in here as well. So like, here's another one. Let's look at another malicious one. So this is a way that you can go through and find these and start getting them in there, because these threat actors will bounce their mail off of different mail servers that haven't been secured, and they're duplicating logins. So like login.aol.com, they're doing dashes here. So this is typo squatting. So this is a way for you to identify those and find them. This is a technique that you can use. Barrett, are there any questions on anything that we went through?
One comment came in and asking, as people are trying to follow along, if you could zoom in on the text a little bit or lower resolution. I think it's a little challenging for some folks.
I always make a mistake and do that. I apologize. So this will now make it that you can actually see the screen. Thank you. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks,
make sure for the next one I'm zoomed in all the way, but that's why I give you these links, so you can actually, all these tabs I have open are the exact same ones that I'm showing. So you have those so you can see them whatever resolution you need to. Okay. So I wanted to show you one that sometimes happens, that you can say, how can I investigate a phishing email that came into me and it's saying it's coming from a person that I know it didn't come from that person? How can I get some point of where I should start to look? So let me show you that real quick. So if I come into here and I'll bring this up and let me give you some URLs. Okay.
Hey, Benjamin, while you're sharing those URLs, we had another question about where you found the hash value of the image that you had showed before.
Sure. So I'll show you. So what happened was, I'll run it again so you can see in exactly how to do it. Okay. So we had that one login for AOL. It would be this one. Okay, login.aol.com. So from here, I went to URL scan.io and I told it to go to that real site. Okay. So it's going to go there and it's going to pull in the image because it's real. Okay. Once it pulls that in, it will know all of the images that it pulled from the machine. And there's once you look at the HTML, you can actually see the breakdown of everything that was in there. And then with that, you can expand out the images, and then there'll be a hash value there. And if you click on it, it will run a query of that hash in their system and say all the other domains that are using it. Okay, so we'll just give this another 30 seconds or so, and we'll see it. But let me find. Okay, so here's one, login.aol.com. So from here, you're on the summary screen where you can see the image, okay? So now what I want to do is I want to see the actual what builds this page. So if I go to HTML, you can see all of the things that were here, and anything ending in like PNG or SVG, those are all like images. So I wanted to see this particular image. So if I come over to the magnifying glass on the right and I click on it, there's a resource hash that's listed here, okay? So if I click on that, it will run a search of that hash and show me everywhere that that has been seen. And as I come through, we'll start seeing everything listed in here for that hash value. And as we scroll down and I load it up more, there's the first one at the very bottom. So when I click on it, it brings up a related domain that had that exact same image in it. Any other questions on that? And then from here, I can look at IPs and other things and go back and search in passive total for the domain or IP and see what happened there. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a couple slides, and then we will go into this additional phishing investigation. So sometimes, so like here's an email that I personally get about once a week, maybe twice a week, that there's usually something wrong with my Wells Fargo account, but I don't use Wells Fargo banking. So they want me to update my account, or your account is frozen, you're delinquent in payment, you have an overdraft. There's all these different ones I get. So I want to show you now from here, I know it's not this, I want to find out like where it's coming from, okay? So I want to go in and figure out, hey, where is it coming from? Is it legitimate? Is it not legitimate? How can I tell where that initial source came from? So what you can do is you can actually view the source on the email. So like in Outlook, if you right click, you can say on an email, you can say view source. You copy everything from there, and then I can go into the email header analysis, and it will go through and break down, break down exactly where it came from. You can see, hey, this is blacklisted. Hey, this one is also blacklisted. So you can actually go through and say, this is the first hop. This is where it initiated from. So that IP address, if I search that IP address in passive total, I can now understand what's happening. You know, like where did it come from? Where was the original source where it saw that email coming from? It could have been an open relay. It could be a lot of stuff, but that gives me one point where I can look at, because the email itself, the name can be completely fake and you can't tell. So I wanted to go through and show that for you real quick. So when we take a look at this that view source, so what I recommend is take an email message, and if you have a fishy one, great. Right click on it and show the source. So let me see. I don't have my Outlook open. Let me see if I can bring one over real quick. Let me see if I have anything in here that I might be able to show. Let me look at junk mail. View source. So when you view a source, it looks like this. So if you copy it, and then let's look at analyzing the headers. So if I paste that in, this is a real email. Oops. You can notice that who it was sent to, what's happened, and it gives you the breakdown. So everything looks fine on this. There's nothing weird or anything, but you can view the information and check to see if there's anything that wasn't right. The Google one, let me bring that one up. Gmail, admin, email, header, analyzer. Here we go. Oh, so sometimes I get this when I try to analyze the headers in the Gmail admin tool. So that's why I've been using this one. So sometimes it's a hit and miss, even though I was using it from a Gmail account. We use hosted Gmail, so it didn't work. But this is what I use. So now what I can do is I can take this IP address that's listed here, and I can go into Passive Total, and I can search for this. Okay. So when I search for this, I got this resolved domain associated with this particular IP address. So this resolved domain that's here, if I right click on that and open another tab, it shows me that all of the IP addresses that it had over that time period. So one thing I wanted to do was I said, hey, what is this? What is this remote WD domain? If I really want to see what this is. So when I search this, I found out something that was interesting. This domain was off for quite a while. So where did it go? Device, certificates. No certificate on this one. If I come here, I find that there's 100 certificates associated with this. So let's take a look at the certificates. We'll take a look at the WHOIS records, and you'll tell me if there's anything that's suspicious with this. So if we take a look at the certificates, let's encrypt. Let's encrypt. Free certificate authority being used. Okay, and let's look at the WHOIS records. Let's try to see who this is. WDC.com. So this is Western Digital Organization. Do you see this? So somehow the Western Digital domain, this is where this email came through, the hard drive company. So there's something strange with this, and it doesn't show that there was any activity after this date. So it seems like somebody might have started to use this domain name and associate it with email spam or phishing that's out there. So there's a lot of things out here. If I'm looking at that same domain, there's 14 certificates associated with this, where we see this infrastructure that's existing on this domain name. So this is a way for you to go through and try to find those threads to pull on that may or may not lead you anywhere, but at least gives you some point other than a bad email address that's in the header. So this can give you that jump off point that could open it up. But this one I just looked at yesterday, and it's Western Digital, and it's kind of weird that Western Digital would be the source of the email to me. Doesn't make sense that that's where we're coming from. So I'll spend more time on this, and the next workshop I'll see what else I found with this, because one of the things that I had found yesterday when I ran this query was there was 500 IP addresses associated with the domain. So in one day. So it was like, it was up for one day, bunch of mail probably went out, and then it was gone. So it was kind of weird to see that type of numbers for a single day in its heat map.
Hey, Benjamin, we did have a question on whether you could pivot off the certificates, but I think that's where you're going next, right?
Yeah, so you can pivot off the certificates. You can pivot off of the serial number or the common names as well. So for example, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so you can see this. So if we're inside the certificate, you have the SHA-1, there's a serial number, and anything in blue you can pivot off of. So right now we haven't seen that certificate associated with an IP. It's associated with the subdomain. But if I right click on this and open another tab, that will show me everywhere that this certificate has been seen in the world. And right now it is only on that one device. And we didn't see the IP address with it. So that's why the IP address wasn't associated with it, with the infrastructure. But we're gonna see that in the next exercise where we look at a real place. You're gonna be able to see the certificate, and we'll pivot off of that. Okay. So the next piece I want to get into is, and this is where we're gonna spend most of our time. Can everyone see my slide right now? Doug, can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. I want you to look from the perspective of, people are going to target someplace. How can I look at their infrastructure and find out who's targeting them? Who's targeting them for phish? So with everybody waiting for their stimulus check to show up, people are constantly going to the IRS website and saying, hey, I want to know where my check is. And since this is like, what, the third check that's out there now, people come here all the time to say, where's my check? Is it in the bank? Is it in processing? Oh, I'm not eligible. This will tell you. So if we take a look at the website, and if you go out to, and I'll throw in all the links. If you go out to Google and you say, where's my stimulus check? You're going to get this link. Okay. The important thing is that when you click on that Get My Payment, it takes you to another domain name. This sa.ww4.irs.gov. And that's what's going to be targeting. So that's the target of the bad guys, because they want your PII. They might want to go in there and see if they can change where your payment's going to go. They might say, okay, if I'm targeting this person, then maybe I'll go and steal from their mailbox when it goes in, if they're going to get a physical check. So these are the type of things that you want to understand, and this is where we're going to put our investigation to, is to look at that domain. So let's say in this scenario, you work for the IRS and people are attempting to steal PIA or stimulus checks. So what you need to be able to do is to find out, hey, is there any phish happening right now? Or was there any phish in the past that have happened? And then what proof are you going to be able to obtain to show these phish attacks when you don't have the emails? You're going to have to find them to see if there's any phish. And then you need to investigate to say, okay, what's good, what's bad, what IPs are good and bad, and we need to be able to put that together. And this is what we're going to do. So I'm going to copy some URLs. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you this one URL, because I don't want to give too much away. Okay. And then at the end, I'll give you all the URLs. So I'm going to open up my browser. So we can see this. Okay. So the way that I started to do this was I came in and I said, hey, I want to get my payment. So if I clicked on this, it takes me here. So here's the payment. So if I want to find out what this is, if I click on it, it says, okay, this is the domain that you would land on. Okay. So I want to take this domain, and this is what I'm going to search. So if I go to RiskIQ and I start off and I search on this, this is what I get. Okay. And this is the real site. So this is like, it's legitimate, it's good. So now I want to find from this good, I want to find bad. And how am I going to do that? And where should I look? And how would I determine if something's good or bad? And this is what we're going to begin. So if we take a look at the certificates, okay, let's see what they're using. And since we have like 125 people on here, it's a little bit slow when we do these particular ones. So as I expand this out, I can see that interest, they're using interest, the organization name, Internal Revenue Service, the different domains that are associated with this particular certificate, and all of the 90 IP addresses that we've seen the certificate on. So this is how we link them together, okay? So that's all good. And then we have all the subdomains, that's normal. And you can see all the different IP addresses and the little triangles of when things changed. And you can see how they're getting more and more, and now they're down just to 2 IPs and probably a big load balancer in there. Now we're going to get into trackers, okay? So if I'm a bad guy, and I'm going to duplicate this website, I'm probably going to just run a tool that duplicates everything. When I duplicate that, it's going to duplicate the Google Analytic codes, the trackers, the cookies that are on that page, and put them on the bad site. So if I had access to Google Analytics and I can log in, I could see that from there and see all the ones that, for domains that we don't own and operate, I could potentially do that. But we don't have access to that. So we can use passive total to do it. So if I come in here and the second 2 values here, I'm just going to right click on that one, open another tab, right click on that one, open another tab. So now I've run a pivot search to say, look for these Google Analytic number and the tracking ID worldwide, okay? So the first one was that account number. So if I start looking at this, I can see first and last seen. This started 2017, and this one is as of the 16th. Here I have one that started on the 27th and ended on the 27th. That's really short. Here's one that started on the 26th and ended on the 27th. So all of these that are starting to use this, you're going, hey, these are all suspicious. So if I open these up in another tab, okay, I can start to look at these and see, hey, what are these? How long have they been around? So this one has been around since 2013. There's nothing in here saying that anything is bad in here per se. The WHOIS data, if we take a look, we go, they're using Gmail. Okay, trying to see, nothing stands out as being bad. But if I take this domain and I copy it, I open up another tab to the right and I go out to URL scan.io and I go to the search and let's look at that domain. Let's see if there's anything that shows up. Oh, 19 days ago, that's about the same time. Get my check. And if I take a look at this, oh, look, we found a fish. So even though it might not be there today, at one point they probably had some vulnerability on their site. Somebody went in there, put this in there, and started stealing data. Okay. So now that I look at this, I can see all the information that's in here. I can look at the HTTP and I can see images. Let's see if there's any image file in here. These are all the, here's a logo. So if I came here and I said, okay, show me everything that has that, I can see these are all legitimate, and these are not. So these are probably all bad stuff from over a month ago, okay? If we go look at the other tracker, okay? So this was, if we look at that domain inside of RiskIQ, let me do that real quick. Open another tab. Okay. If I come in here, I can look at trackers. So I look at the trackers. Do you see anything that's unusual in here? Does anybody see this right here? Mark of the web. Does anybody know what mark of the web is? You can just throw in the chat yes or no. So what happens is if I go to a website and I'm using Internet Explorer, I can tell it to make an offline copy of that, save it down to my machine so I can view it offline. When you do that, it makes a watermark in the actual document object model and says, hey, there's this original website was copied from this other website, which was this original website here. So we have the ability now to know that, hey, this good website, somebody went in there and put up a version of something that was copied from that original website. And the Google Analytic codes of the good site are also going to be listed there, because when we talk to that site, we would see those there. But we can see that somebody used mark of the web to duplicate the site. Okay, so let's look at the other code that we had in there. Okay, so we had this. Let me find it. I'll go back to the original one, and we'll go to the tracking ID. So let's look at the tracking ID. So here we're on the tracking ID. We see that first one. We see the second one listed here. So let's open up that second one. Okay. So from here, let's take a look. So we go blacklisted 19 days ago. It's been around since 2015 or 2011. So let's look at the trackers underneath here. Mark of the web URL. There it is again. So somebody used IE when they duplicated this, okay? Or something that uses IE to grab the images and build this offline version of the website. So that's another way to find it. So one thing I can do is I could take the real domain, okay? So here's that real domain. I'm going to copy it. And now that we know that, hey, there's a tracker in there, and that tracker is showing the real website, let's search for it. So if I come in here and I paste this in, I can tell it, go look at trackers, okay? Don't just find the machine. I want you to look at trackers. So now what it's going to do is it's going to go out there and it's going to search for these trackers. So that domain name, that value, has been seen in all of these domains around the world. So you can do this for yourself. You can take your own domain, look for the trackers, and see it. So as we go through, you can see all of these mark of the webs. And you also see these HTT tracks as well. And these were back in June. Somebody used a tool called HTT track that you might use internally to copy something from QA and put it in production, or from dev to QA. When you use those tools to copy it, it puts watermarks in there. So you have to be careful when you take something internally and put it outside, because these are legitimate tools that people are using. So this is a way to find it. But you might see other things like document base URL. So somebody was linking to this to see if you're eligible and had a document there. But if I want to be very specific and only look for mark of the web host, I'm going to show you now how to edit the URL to find those. And there's two different things I'm going to do. One of them is for mark of the web. So I'm just going to copy this the way it is. It's case sensitive. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to paste that in, and I'm going to do that. Okay. So now when I do that and I hit enter, it's going to limit my search to only be mark of the web, and it's going to give me those results. Okay. So this is very specific now, looking for the web source host to be that, okay? So this is a way that I can save this query and find out anybody that's doing mark of the web. If I wanted to do one for HTT track, I can come in here and copy that, and I can edit the URL, and I can say, paste that in, and that's how you do it. So this is what you can do for finding those components as well. So once you have the component there and you want something specific, you can go up and you can edit the URL and put that in there and the version number and things like that. And that's how you can find these, okay? Any questions on this so far? And then we're going to go into like, let's look at these same things in URL Scan.io, find some other ones if there's anything active right now. Barrett, any questions?
Yeah, Benjamin, if you can run a search against a domain, say your own company, but there are hundreds of trackers returned in the results, is there an efficient way to see if there are any domains which aren't your own without having to click through each?
So if you're looking at your own, okay, so let's go back and let's look at the original one here. So if I came in and I just want to do the regular search, because let's look at their trackers. There's cookies and trackers. Let's say the cookies. Let's look at cookies now, okay? So when you look at these lists, you can't tell if anybody's bad by looking at your own, because you're only seeing your own. But the only way that you can go back and look to see if anybody other than you are doing it is to go and search for each one of those. What you could do is you could probably use the API to go and quickly look at each one of those and only show you the results that don't have your domain in there, for example, and then spit out those. So that would probably be an easy way for you to take that complete list of cookies and the complete list of trackers, and say with the trackers, there's 16 of them here. I can open all these up and see them in another tab. But if I downloaded this list, okay, so I can download this list. It's opening. Give me a second. And I'll bring it up here and zoom in a little bit so you can see them. And so I have these values here. So I can take these values and then I can run, write a query, use the API and say, go query each one of these, give me the list of domains that are associated with them, and then show me any ones that aren't mine. You could probably easily do that, and that would be the best way if you have hundreds. Otherwise, you have to click on each one and look at it. But once you figure out how that process would work, that's where the scripting comes in and makes you more efficient, because once you build it once, you can run this all the time and see if anything new shows up, or take the results, throw them in a project and see what's happening when there's changes with those projects. Doug, anything else I might have missed?
No, I mean, the API and scripting is probably the easiest way to do that with passive total only. This is something we tackle in another product in a more programmatic fashion, but with just the passive total data set, it's fairly easy with the API.
So I have something I was going to show. I can show part of something I was going to show next workshop that talks about, like, if you want to take a Jupyter notebook, and I have a method I went through looking at certificates and say, okay, now I want to do an investigation which looks at these particular aspects of a certificate and then expand it. We have about 10 minutes. I can run through that if people want to see it. And then I can show the Jupyter notebook if we want. Otherwise, we'll stay on this topic. Barrett, just let me know if they want me to go into like API to show any of that.
Hey, Benjamin, really quickly, a couple questions around this before we move on. Is it possible to search on a specific value type, e.g. a search only for mark of the web? And then also asked if you could show how to get to the tracker search view again.
Okay, so what I recommend is that you copy. So for example, let's go back to the mark of the web one. Let me bring that up real quick. So if I look at this one, for example, you'll notice that under trackers, you're going to see mark of the web. Okay, so if I grab this and I say, okay, I'd like to go and look at tracker, and I'm going to look here, and I'm going to look at www.netflix. Oh, it's doing this. Hold on. Search tracker. Okay, So what I did was I took out it should be search trackers instead of the domain in there. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it in the chat for everyone. So if you put any domain after that, it will now look for, hold on, let me go back. It's this one. So if I take this URL, it's not letting me copy it. Okay, I'll be careful again and copy this. Copy. Paste. There we go. So this URL, whatever domain you put at the end, and you should do it with the ... with the www and without, we'll search for those particular types of things. So I can search for any domain by using this URL. Okay, by editing the URL and using it in this fashion, I can see if anybody's duplicating my own. The same is true for the other one that we had, which was looking at. Let me bring this one up. I think this one had the HTT track in it, so I'll just copy it to make it more efficient. No, this was Mark of the Web. Import. I'm going to look for the tracker one. Here we go. If I search for tracker, on the real one, you will see it. Okay. So here, if I want to look to see if anybody is using HTT track, I would just change this right here to be HTT track. And I'll copy this and paste this in. And if I search, we can see which hackers are using HTT track. So this was back in September of 2020. This one was using HTT track to duplicate it. So that's how you can search for any domain using those two ways. Or look for trackers on yourself, but you might see a bunch of other trackers that are not specifically with software that is used to copy domain. And that's what this one was look at your domain, search by trackers, and then you can see all the different types of trackers that they used. Anything else, Barrett?
No, we're good to go.
Okay.
Thanks.
No problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm copying all of the URLs that I had bookmarked for this. So give me a second. And I'm putting them into the chat. And this is also in the presentation. So all of the URLs that I used are here, walking through and showing them. And I even have the Mark of the Web and the HTTP track listed here to look for those in particular. So it's really cool. So what happened, the way that we had the Mark of the Web, it's a fascinating story. I read an article about the United States Senate releasing an investigation where they said this phishing attack was tied back to Russia. And I go, how could that be that it was tied back to Russia? And what happened was they determined that the Mark of the Web was being used, and that Mark of the Web showed that the Office 365 login page they chose was from a server in Russia. So it was a URL from Russia. And then what happens is, because the person that they're targeting was in English, it changed all the wording to be English automatically. So at that time, we didn't have the ability to pull that out. We didn't have it in there. We didn't know about it. And so Jonathan, one of our threat investigators, said we could easily pull that out of the document object model and make it a tracker. And so he pulled it out. He had the full URL that was in there. So if you take a look, when we look at these mark of the web source hosts and different things, there's generally two different things. So there's the source host in the tracker, and then there's the value. So right here you have the URL, URL and the host. So what happens is you can't search on this URL, but you can search on the host. So this was what we were showing, but you couldn't find yourself in there. So we made another one where we truncated and only grabbed the domain part as well out of this URL. So you can search on this, and then you can see what they used to duplicate, what they were looking at. So that's where that came from. And then we did HTTP track because we found that same capability inside of HTTP track. So those are some things that we did to help people. And then after this article was published, about 6 months later, I did a training for the US Senate for their security team. And when we were doing the training and I showed this, a gentleman stood up and he goes, "It took me 3 months to do that investigation. And you can now do it in seconds because we're checking every mark of the web on every site in the world." So they basically now can look at every senator and run this query looking for their real domain and see if mark of the web shows up or HC track. You can just have those as queries and look to see if anything pops up. So you can do this for your own domains. And this is how you can be proactive to try to stop these phishing attacks before they're active. And with that, we're almost out of time. So Barrett, any other questions?
Yeah, I think we have time for one question before we come up to the top of the hour here. Benjamin and Doug, looking for recommendations from both of you. We all have friends, family, relatives that aren't as savvy as each of you and the folks on this workshop are. Any advice on how to avoid some of these scams for someone that's just a normal internet user?
So one of the big things is, and this is why I tell my parents, they're in their 80s. I said, if your bank or Amazon or Netflix or anybody tells you that there's a problem with your account, click here and do it. I said, don't. Go and open up a fresh browser and log into your account and see if there's any issues. There'll be notifications, there'll be stuff in there to let you know. Don't just click on the email and go there. You can read the email and it might be true, but don't click on the link to take you directly there. Go there directly in your browser, typing it in the way you normally do it to prevent that attack. That's one of the first things you should do. And just educate them that if you see it on the screen, it looks correct, it doesn't mean that that's where you're actually going, and you can right click and view the source and see, what the real URL is. And typo squatting, could look really, really similar. Doug, anything from you?
Yeah, same. So this is kind of a generational thing. So for some of the older generation, like my parents, older aunts, uncles, etc., I tell them to call. Like if it's your bank, if it's life insurance, if it's anything major like that, and you see an email, use the phone number and call, and not the phone number you see on the page in the contact. Like you have their phone number from legitimate correspondence or the legitimate website. So try that first. I also work with school-age kids, like doing cyber education, and it's this. They are less likely to pick up the phone. I think going back generationally, they don't want to talk to people on the phone, so they like chat boxes, chat bots. So it is more important for them to be very diligent. Like starting place, especially for young children, is just trying to teach them what like a domain and a top level domain is, and getting them to understand like how URL is built and using that as a does it look right or not starting point.
Yeah.
You can't go off the web page by itself anymore. You can't even go off underlying technologies like chatbots. Sometimes threat actors are working the chatbots. So
Yeah, my youngest boy years ago got his Minecraft account stolen, locked out because he got an email and he put his credentials in, and next thing you know, someone logged in and changed the password and took it over. Yeah.
Got it. So we're right at the top of the hour now. So that's all the time we have for questions today. We'll follow up directly with those who asked questions we weren't able to get to live. You can always reach out to success@riskiq.net with additional questions. Thank you to Doug and Benjamin for a great workshop today. And thank you everyone for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.